The sound of demolition machinery echoed like a brutal requiem through the small valley in Millbrook, Connecticut. Samuel Wright, a 68-year-old man with hands calloused by the work of generations, stood paralyzed before the wreckage of what had once been the Wright family barn, a structure that had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and countless New England storms. "This is illegal." "You can't do that." His hoarse voice could barely override the noise of the heavy equipment. Margaret Johnson, the new director of the Millbrook Estates Homeowners Association, watched the demolition with a satisfied smile on her face, her high heels sinking lightly into the damp earth of the field. "Mr. Wright, the HOA's decisions are final. This barn is not in keeping with the new aesthetic standards we are implementing," Margaret declared, adjusting her gold-framed glasses with a studied gesture. "Besides, the premium gym we're going to build here will significantly enhance the entire property." Samuel felt the weight of each of the 5 generations of Wrights who had worked that land before him. The barn, built in 1892 by his great-grandfather Abraham Wright, wasn't just a structure. It was a living museum of local history. Inside, now reduced to rubble, were century-old farm tools, original documents from the settlement of Millbrook, and the restored wagon that had brought the first settlers to the area. "You had no right," Samuel muttered, as his neighbor and longtime friend, Rebecca Martinez, a 72-year-old retired lawyer, hurried over, her face red with indignation. "Samuel, I called my old office. What they've done is completely illegal," said Rebecca, holding up a folder of documents. "The barn had been registered as a heritage site since 1975. They would need state approval for demolition." Margaret Johnson laughed, an artificial sound that matched her impeccable tweed ensemble. "Honey, the rules changed when you joined the HOA. Our contract gives us broad powers to improve the community." The story of the destruction of the Wright barn had begun 3 months earlier, when the old HOA board was replaced after a controversial election. Margaret Johnson, newly arrived from Manhattan, had promised to transform Millbrook Estates into an oasis of modern luxury. Her first action was to increase the monthly fees by 200%, citing the need for modernization. Samuel had been in hospital with his daughter Lucy, who was battling lymphoma, when he received Rebecca's text message. "They're tearing down the barn. Come quickly." But it was too late. "I'm going to sue you and the whole board," declared Samuel, his voice shaking with restrained anger. "That barn contained irreplaceable historical documents." "Documents? Oh, you mean those old papers?" Margaret replied dismissively. "Our staff put them in some boxes. They're in the association's storeroom, I think." Rebecca put her hand on Samuel's shoulder, feeling his muscles tense. "Don't worry, Sam. I'll call my old colleague, Alexandra Bennett. She specializes in real estate law and cases involving abusive HOAs." Other residents were beginning to gather around the scene. Harold Peterson, a retired history teacher who often brought his students to visit the historic barn, was furiously photographing the wreckage. Marie Chen, owner of the small local bookstore, filmed everything with her cell phone, broadcasting it live on social media. "This is an outrage," shouted Harold, his normally serene face contorted with rage. "That barn was a vital part of Millbrook's history." Margaret rolled her eyes, checking her expensive wristwatch. "History is the past, gentlemen. We're creating the future. A state-of-the-art gym, with exclusive tuition of just $200 a month, will bring the right kind of people to our community." Samuel watched the last moments of the demolition, each blow from the machines taking with it pieces of his memories. There, his father had taught him how to fix tractors. There, he himself had taught his daughter Lucy to ride her first pony. There, generations of family stories had been preserved, only to be destroyed by a person who saw value only in dollars and cents. "Margaret," Samuel said, his voice now dangerously calm, "you may have destroyed the barn, but you won't destroy what it represents. This community is not for sale." Rebecca was already on the phone to Alexandra Bennett, who was listening intently to the details of the case. "Yes, Alex, we have all the documentation from the historical registry. No, they didn't get any authorization. Yes, it was completely illegal. As the sun began to set over Millbrook, casting long shadows over the wreckage of the Wright barn, a crowd of residents gathered in solidarity. Margaret Johnson may have won this battle, but the war for Millbrook's soul had only just begun. Samuel Wright looked into the faces of his neighbors and friends, seeing in their eyes the same determination he felt in his heart. The barn may have fallen, but its spirit, the spirit of community, history, and resistance against tyranny, remained stronger than ever. The fight to preserve the soul of Millbrook had begun, and Samuel Wright was determined to ensure that his family's legacy would not be forgotten. With Rebecca by his side and the support of the community, he would stand up to Margaret Johnson and her distorted vision of progress, not just for his own family, but for all future generations who deserve to know and preserve their history. The morning after the demolition, Rebecca Martinez's modest house became the makeshift headquarters of the resistance against Margaret Johnson. The living room, with its walls littered with dusty diplomas and legal certificates, was now home to more than 24 outraged residents of Millbrook Estates. Alexandra Bennett, a middle-aged attorney with graying hair and piercing eyes, flipped through the latest documents on the antique coffee table. "The historical record of the Wright barn is irrefutable," she declared, adjusting her reading glasses. "The HOA violated not only state regulations, but also federal historic preservation laws." Samuel Wright, sitting in his favorite chair, the same one where he used to tell stories of the barn to his grandchildren, held an untouched cup of coffee. His hands were shaking slightly as he scanned the photos of the wreckage on his cell phone. "We found this in the rubble," said Harold Peterson, placing an oxidized bronze plaque on the table. It was the barn's original heritage designation, dating from 1975. "Margaret may have destroyed the structure, but she can't erase our history." Marie Chen, who had live-streamed the demolition, reported that her video had already had more than 50,000 views. "The local press is interested," she said, showing emails from several regional newspapers. "The Hartford Courier wants to do a cover story." "We need to act quickly," Alexandra warned, organizing a pile of legal documents. "Margaret has already registered the Academy's plans with the town hall. If we don't get an injunction by the end of the week, she'll start building." Rebecca poured more coffee for everyone, her experienced hands moving purposefully between the cups. "I've discovered something interesting about our dear Margaret," she said, her voice laden with irony. "She has a history in New York, 3 lawsuits for predatory practices in neighborhood associations." "How did she manage to become director here?" asked Samuel, finally taking a sip of his cold coffee. "Manipulation," replied Rebecca. "She bought several properties through shell companies before the election. Technically, each property entitled her to 1 vote. Alexandra made some notes on her pad. "This could be our first line of attack. If we prove that the election was fraudulent, all subsequent decisions could be overturned." At that moment, Lucy Wright, Samuel's daughter, entered the room leaning on a cane. Still pale from her cancer treatment, her eyes shone with determination. "Dad, I found this in my old room," she said, handing over a worn photo album. The yellowed pages contained photographs of the barn through the decades, family celebrations, harvests, weddings, and graduations. Each image was a silent testimony to the importance of that structure to the community. "This is perfect," Marie exclaimed. "We can use these photos to show the historical and emotional value of the barn. Public opinion will be key." A notification sound interrupted the meeting. Harold checked his phone and his face turned red with anger. "Margaret just sent an email to all the residents. She's increasing the HOA fees by another 50% to cover anticipated legal costs." "She's trying to intimidate us," Alexandra observed, her eyes shining with professional determination. "It's a common tactic, to put financial pressure on people until they give up." Samuel stood up, walking over to the window. Across the street, He could see the rubble of the barn being removed by a demolition crew. "My great-grandfather built that barn with his own hands," he said, his voice breaking. "He survived the Great Depression by selling milk and eggs from there. During World War II, he housed medical equipment for soldiers returning home wounded." Lucy approached her father, placing a hand on his shoulder. "And that's where you taught me to ride, Dad. Where we kept old Dusty." Alexandra began to outline the legal strategy. "We're going to file a civil suit for material and moral damages. At the same time, we'll ask for an investigation into the legitimacy of the HOA's election, and most importantly, an emergency injunction to prevent any new construction on the site." "We need more," said Rebecca, her years of legal experience evident in her voice. "We need to expose Margaret publicly, show who she really is." Marie was already typing on her laptop. "I can create a website documenting everything, the history of the barn, her previous lawsuits in New York, the photos of the illegal demolition. Let's make it go viral." The meeting went on for hours, with each participant contributing their skills and resources. Harold offered to organize a peaceful protest. Lucy, weakened though she was, promised to coordinate a social media campaign. Rebecca and Alexandra refined the legal strategy. As the sun began to set, Samuel watched the group disperse. Each person carried with them a specific task, a role in the battle to come. The destruction of the barn, which had initially seemed like a devastating defeat, had awakened something powerful in the community, a sense of shared purpose, a collective determination to fight injustice. "It's not just about the barn," said Lucy, now alone with her father. "It's about who we are as a community, about not letting people like Margaret Johnson destroy what took generations to build." Samuel hugged his daughter, feeling a mixture of pride and determination. The Wright barn may have fallen, but its legacy was more alive than ever in the hearts and minds of those who had come together to fight for justice. The battle royal was just beginning. A discreet brown envelope arrived in Rebecca Martinez's hands on a rainy Thursday morning. Inside, documents that would make Margaret Johnson lose her smug smile. Diana Foster, Margaret's former administrative assistant in Manhattan, had finally responded to Alexandra's request for information about the HOA director's past. "You need to see this," Rebecca told Samuel, spreading the papers out on her dining room table. Margaret not only rigged elections in other HOAs, she also diverted funds from maintenance fees to personal offshore accounts. Samuel examined the documents carefully, his calloused hands shaking slightly. "That explains why she raised the fees so quickly here." "There's more," Rebecca continued. "The academy she's planning to build? It's part of a network of front establishments used for money laundering. 3 of them were shut down in New Jersey last year." The investigation was gaining momentum, but Margaret did not remain inactive. That same afternoon, posters appeared all over Millbrook Estates, announcing a special HOA meeting for the following day. The theme, Modernization and Enhancement, New Master Plan for Millbrook Estates. Lucy Wright, still recovering from her last chemotherapy session, was methodically scanning old photographs of the barn for the website created by Marie. "Dad, look at this," she called out, pointing to one image in particular. "That's the governor's signature on the barn's historic registration document. It's clearly visible." The photograph was further proof of the illegality of the demolition, but Samuel barely had time to examine it. His phone rang. It was Harold Peterson, his voice urgent on the other end of the line. "Samuel, you need to come to City Hall, now." 15 minutes later, Samuel found Harold in the Public Records Department. The retired teacher had discovered something alarming. Margaret had submitted documents claiming that the barn presented an imminent structural risk, thus justifying its emergency demolition. "She forged an engineering report," Harold explained, showing the papers. "The engineer who supposedly signed this died 3 years ago." Alexandra Bennett was immediately notified. "This is exactly what we needed," she said over the phone. "Falsifying public documents is a federal crime. I'll prepare a complaint to the FBI." Meanwhile, at the HOA special meeting, Margaret Johnson was presenting her modernization plan to a divided audience. Using a flawless PowerPoint, She showed renders of luxurious gyms, spas, and recreational areas that promised to transform Millbrook Estates into an exclusive suburban paradise. Just imagine. Her mellifluous voice echoed through the community hall. Millbrook Estates becoming the most desirable address in Connecticut. Of course, that will require some sacrifices. It was at that moment that Rebecca Martinez stood up, holding a red folder. How about we talk about your other sacrifices, Ms. Johnson, like the embezzled funds in Manhattan or the ghost gyms in New Jersey? Margaret's smile faltered for a moment. I don't know what you're talking about. Those are slanderous accusations. Defamation requires lies. Alexandra Bennett appeared in the doorway, accompanied by 2 FBI agents. And we have very concrete evidence. Chaos ensued in the assembly. Margaret tried to leave through the back door, but was intercepted. As the agents led her out, she still tried to keep up appearances. This is a misunderstanding. You can't do this to me. But they could. And they did. The next few hours were a whirlwind of statements, declarations, and revelations. Margaret's scheme was bigger than anyone imagined. She had rigged elections in 5 different HOAs along the East Coast, always following the same pattern. Buy properties through shell companies, take control of the association, and then begin a process of modernization that invariably involved controversial demolitions and abusive fee increases. The money never went to real improvements, one of the FBI agents explained to Samuel. It was all part of a money laundering scheme. The gyms were just fronts. Lucy, who was watching the whole thing from her wheelchair, held her father's hand. This won't bring the barn back, she said softly. But at least it won't destroy other communities. As the evening progressed, the residents of Millbrook Estates gathered at the site where the Wright barn once stood. Marie Chen organized an impromptu vigil with candles and old photographs projected onto a makeshift screen. The Wright barn wasn't just a building, Harold Peterson told the gathered crowd. It was a symbol of our history, our community, and although its physical structure has been destroyed, its meaning lives on in each of us. Rebecca Martinez was already working on the next legal steps. With Margaret imprisoned and the HOA board dissolved, there was a unique opportunity to rewrite the association's rules, making it more democratic and transparent. Maybe, Samuel reflected, looking at the projected photographs of his old barn, something good can come out of all this. A stronger, more united community. Alexandra Bennett agreed. People often say that you can't fight the system, but sometimes, when we unite, we can not only fight, we can win. The evening ended with a collective commitment. To rebuild. Not just the barn, although plans for that were already being discussed, but also the community ties that Margaret Johnson had tried to destroy with her greed. You know, Dad, Lucy said as they drove home, Great-Grandpa Abraham would be proud, not just for fighting for the barn, but for fighting for each other. Samuel looked at his daughter, at the villagers still gathered under the stars, at the remains of the barn that would soon give way to something new and better. Yes, he replied, he would be. The news of Margaret Johnson's arrest echoed throughout Millbrook Estates as a wake-up call for necessary changes. A week after her arrest, residents gathered at the community center for a historic assembly. The goal was not only to elect a new board of directors for the HOA, but to completely rewrite its rules and bylaws. We need to make sure this never happens again, declared Rebecca Martinez, now heading the restructuring committee. The room was packed, with extra chairs rushed in to accommodate all the residents, an unprecedented turnout for association meetings. Alexandra Bennett, standing by the podium, presented the latest findings of the federal investigation. FBI agents found evidence that Margaret had planned to demolish not only the Wright barn, but also other historic properties in Millbrook. She had an elaborate scheme to turn our community into an overpriced luxury complex. Samuel Wright, sitting in the front row next to Lucy, looked at a detailed map of the community projected on the wall. Red dots marked the properties that Margaret had acquired through her shell companies, almost a quarter of Millbrook Estates. What happens to these properties now? asked Harold Peterson, adjusting his reading glasses. They'll be auctioned off, replied Alexandra. And here's the interesting bit. By law, the current residents have first refusal. It's our chance to give Millbrook back to the families who really care about this community. Marie Chen raised her hand, her laptop open on her knees. The website we created documenting the history of the Wright Barn has received over 200 Joe hits in the last week. Historians and preservationists from all over the country are offering their support for its reconstruction. Lucy Wright, still pale but visibly stronger, presented a proposal she had developed during her sleepless nights. What if we turned the new barn into a community center? We could preserve its historic function and at the same time create a space for meetings, events, and education. The idea was met with enthusiasm. Samuel felt his heart warm as he saw how the destruction of the barn, which had initially seemed like an irreparable loss, was catalyzing a positive transformation throughout the community. I have a suggestion, said Jennifer Ramirez, an architect who had recently moved to Millbrook.
We can rebuild the barn using some of the original timbers we were able to recover, incorporating modern elements that will make it more functional, but keeping its historic essence. The discussion went on for hours, with each resident contributing ideas and concerns. A new set of rules for the HOA was established, with an emphasis on transparency,
community participation, and historic preservation. Strict limits were placed on the board's powers, and an ethics board was created to oversee all important decisions. But how are we going to pay for all this? Asked a resident from the back of the room. Rebecca smiled, taking a folder from her bag. Remember the absurd fees Margaret charged? The FBI traced the money. Not only will we get every penny back, but we'll also receive compensation for the damage caused. What's more, 3 historic preservation foundations have already offered to help rebuild the barn. Samuel watched Lucy make detailed notes on her tablet. Her daughter, although still battling cancer, had found a new purpose in coordinating the reconstruction project. We need to document everything, she explained. Every phase of the reconstruction, every story, every memory. This won't just be a new building, it will be a symbol of resistance and renewal. Harold Peterson volunteered to lead a historical documentation committee, promising to work with local schools to create educational programs centered on Millbrook's history. Marie Chen offered her bookstore as a collection point for donations of historical materials and old photos of the community. As the meeting drew to a close, Rebecca introduced one last item: the election of the new HOA board. We need people who understand the true meaning of community, she said, looking directly at Samuel. To her surprise, Samuel found himself unanimously elected as the association's new president. I don't know if I'm the right person, he hesitated. Lucy squeezed his hand. Dad, you're exactly the right person. You never gave up fighting for what's right, even when it seemed impossible. The assembly ended with a feeling of hope and renewed purpose. In the parking lot, as the residents said their goodbyes, Samuel stood for a moment, looking at the spot where his barn once stood. The rubble had been cleared away, and the leveled land awaited a new beginning. You know what's funny? Said Lucy, stopping beside him. Margaret wanted to erase our history, but she ended up making us value our roots even more. Samuel hugged his daughter, feeling a mixture of gratitude and determination. The Wright Barn would be reborn, not just as a physical structure, but as a testament to the power of community united against injustice. And this time, its foundations would be even stronger, built not just with wood and nails, but with the unbreakable bonds of a community that had discovered its true strength. The reconstruction of the Wright Barn began one spring morning, exactly 6 months after its demolition. The site, once covered in rubble, was now buzzing with activity. Community volunteers worked side by side with professional carpenters, following the plans meticulously developed by Jennifer Ramirez. We need to align these beams exactly as they were in the original project, Jennifer instructed, consulting the technical drawings based on the old photographs. Samuel, that mark on the ground. Is that where the main entrance was? Samuel Wright, who was overseeing every detail of the reconstruction, confirmed with a nod. His hands, although no longer as steady as in his younger days, still held the muscle memory of decades of working on that same ground. Lucy, now in remission from cancer, was documenting every step with her professional camera. "Look what we found in the storage boxes," announced Harold Peterson, carrying an object wrapped in faded cloth. It was the original barn bell, miraculously preserved. The bronze, although tarnished by time, still bore the inscription, "Wright Family, 1892. News of the reconstruction had spread beyond Millbrook. The Hartford Courier published a special series on the story, attracting the attention of historic preservationists across the country. A team of PBS documentarians was producing a special on communities resisting predatory gentrification. "The foundations need to be deeper this time," Jennifer explained, marking points on the ground. "We're going to incorporate modern preservation techniques, but keep the historic look. The new barn will be even sturdier than the original." Rebecca Martinez, now vice president of the HOA, coordinated the legal aspects of the reconstruction. Thanks to funds recovered from Margaret Johnson's scam and donations from historic preservation foundations, the project was fully funded. More importantly, new legal protections had been put in place to prevent future demolition attempts. "We found this in the state archives," said Marie Chen, showing a yellowed document. It was a letter written by Abraham Wright in 1892, describing his vision for the barn. "May this structure serve not only to store our tools and crops, but as a symbol of perseverance and community for generations to come." The reconstruction became a collective healing project. Residents who barely knew each other before the incident now worked together, sharing stories and meals. On Saturdays, Lucy organized storytelling sessions, where the older residents shared their memories of the original barn with the children of the community. "Look at this," Harold called out, discovering a partially preserved beam from the rubble. On it, carved by hand, were the initials of 5 generations of Wrights. Samuel ran his fingers over the marks, feeling the weight of family history. The new barn incorporated modern elements that made it more functional as a community center, but maintained its historic essence. Jennifer had designed a natural lighting system that complemented the original windows, and a small outdoor amphitheater had been added for cultural events. "Daddy, look!" Lucy pointed to a group of local school children arriving for their history lesson. Harold was guiding them on a supervised archaeological expedition, allowing them to participate in the discovery and preservation of historical artifacts. As the walls of the new barn rose, the community of Millbrook Estates grew stronger. The HOA, now under Samuel's leadership, had become a model of participatory governance. Monthly meetings, once deserted, now overflowed with engaged residents. "We've found more historical documents," Marie announced, organizing a temporary exhibition in the bookshop. Letters, photographs, even a diary from 1910 describing the great frost that almost destroyed the harvest. The barn saved the community that winter. The story of the fight against Margaret Johnson and the subsequent rebuilding attracted national attention. Other communities began to look to Millbrook as an example of how to resist predatory speculation and preserve their historic heritage. "It's more than a barn," Samuel reflected, watching the work progress. "It's a testament that some things are more valuable than money. That a united community is stronger than any speculator." 6 months after the reconstruction began, the new Wright barn was almost complete. The structure, more imposing than its predecessor, gleamed with new wood, but retained the historic dignity that characterized it. The original bell was reinstalled in its tower, ready to once again mark the hours in Millbrook. The day before the opening, Samuel and Lucy stayed late, organizing the exhibition of photos and artifacts that would tell the story of the barn for future generations. "You know, Dad," said Lucy, adjusting a photograph of her great-grandfather. "Margaret wanted to erase our history, but she ended up making us part of something even bigger." Samuel hugged his daughter. watching the space that would soon be full of life again. The Wright barn had been reborn, not just as a physical structure, but as a symbol of resistance, preservation, and the enduring power of community. On its beams and boards, old and new, was etched a fundamental truth: that the true value of a place is not in its market price, but in the stories, memories, and bonds it harbors and inspires. The sun set over Millbrook Estates, casting golden shadows through the barn's new windows. The bell, cleaned and restored, shone in the twilight, ready to announce a new chapter in the community's history. The struggle was over, but their legacy would continue to echo through the generations, as strong and enduring as the foundations of the Wright barn itself.